Hey there, today I have an order summary video, and in this video I'm going to break down the comic books that I won at auction from the seller on HipComic, Just Comics. This is the companion video to the comic book unboxing number 191. And I want to say too, I don't know if everyone always gets my humor, and that's part of the fun. I didn't intend for the video to be, of course, an attack on anybody. Like, I'm upset that there are people bidding on the auctions. It's really just a way for me to think about other options and opportunities to pick up comic books that hopefully is a theme that you pick up on with my channel, in that there's lots of different ways and methods to acquire comics. And so if we're all in on Infinity Comics, not that I'm not affiliated with them, I don't want to promote them. I'm just pointing out this is where I'm finding some good comics. And if you make the decision to also bid on books from Infinity Comics, first of all, I can't stop you. I don't mind it personally. It's all fine. But that was kind of the point. The point was, don't bid on books just because that's where I'm bidding. I would never do that, or never want to say that. So hopefully that came through, that I wasn't actually upset or anything about that. If everyone that watches my videos goes over to HipComic, bids on Infinity Comics, I feel like it's great for the hobby. That's, I think, what I think about the most is the likelihood that this hobby is going to sustain itself going forward. I think, just being a realist, it's going to gradually decline over time. What I'm trying to do is maximize my enjoyment while I'm collecting, while I have all of my faculties and I'm able to make videos and put great comics like this in a bag and board. As long as I'm able to do that, I want to maximize the enjoyment. This is kind of how I decide to spend my resources. And when it boils down to it, I want to have fun with it. And in order to have fun with the hobby, it's sharing what I do and talking about your experiences. And if the experience is we're all bidding on the same books at Infinity Comics, I think there's a good conversation there to have, and we should be able to have some fun with it. So I didn't really mean anything or have any ulterior motives with that video. Sometimes I feel like I have to be just slightly edgy in order to attract some attention, but I'm not really trying to overdo it or create clickbait or be sort of outraged or something. And I forget what it's called. It's like outrage media or something like that. That's not what I'm trying to do. Now, I would rather show you a spreadsheet, because that's what's exciting to me. Maybe not the most exciting thing, but it's a big part of what I do, and I'm constantly moving things around and trying to readjust formulas. It's one of the reasons why I don't make these spreadsheets available, is because I am almost daily just adjusting the formulas. Like, as I'm learning, I'm just sort of redefining these algorithms. And let me show you what I'm talking about in this order. And you'll have to bear with me. Typically, what I like to do is isolate the order in the spreadsheet view so that none of the other calculations and values are visible, because I personally find it distracting. But there was an order here that was from Infinity Comics. I believe I broke it down earlier, and then there was a Dark Dominion order that I went through. And so this order break down the details of, and I keep saying order, but it's the auction wins. It's right smack in the middle. So just kind of divert your eyes away from some of the other data. And I wanted to just kind of show you how these books ended up, and some of the newer calculations that I'm performing. Nothing earth-shattering, but just a refinement of the sort of auto decision making. Just to go through the summary here, I spent $77.21. That's how much I was invoiced by Just Comics. I was charged $9 to ship these books from Just Comics to me. I did total these up here in column Z on this row here, 10766, and you'll see that if I distributed the shipping across all the books, when I sum up the total cost, it does match the invoice, so I'm working with correct data. As I've mentioned, I like to use the total door-to-door cost so that I really understand when I'm going to make my decision to deal with the book, whether I'm putting it in a personal collection, sending it for pressing, sending it for grading, etc. I want to know what my true cost is, and if it's worth to continue to invest in this book is basically the point. Like, I've collected it, but now do I want to see if I can improve it, or improve the condition or improve the value in some way. Now, in terms of looking at each of the books and looking at the raw value, you'll see here that I was able to, in fact, get a nice bit of raw value return off of, this 10 book auction win. Nothing really major or significant. I think Web of Spider-Man #1 was my favorite book that I picked up, but the value is really being driven here by Wonder Woman 200. And I want to talk about, actually, I'm going to talk about this one last because this is what drove me to tune my auto decisioning a little bit. Let's look at another book that was a decent return, Web of Spider-Man #1. I graded that book as a 9.2. When I zoomed in on it, I did notice a couple of creases / ticks to the spine. I do believe that it could be pressed. And let me move the spreadsheet to the right a little bit so that you can see the decision I made here with the pressing. Almost all of them needed some sort of press or clean and press. So Web of Spider-Man #1, I indicated that it needed a press, but I had it as a 9.2. In a 9.2, it's valued at $61 in a CGC 9.2, which is a nice $12 CGC value add there. X-Men 509, I was very happily surprised. I gave that book a 9.6. It definitely had a very slight stack increase, and then one crease to the spine. On the back, there was a color breaking tick, but I do feel like with the corners being sharp, and this is kind of my working theory, that sharp corners will allow for the book to have a color breaking tick even, or one or two, in fact, and still get a 9.8. I'm still kind of, I don't know what to make of that. I'm still confused by it, honestly. I don't feel like, if I'm looking at two books side by side and there's a book that has two color breaking ticks on the spine and they're white and you can see them, but has sharp corners, versus another book that has no spine issues whatsoever, but both of the corners are just slightly rounded, I'd rather have the book with the slightly rounded corners. I think that the corners almost, the rounding or the softening of those corners, it almost disappears to the eye in terms of presentation. Whereas if I see a color breaking tick and there it is, I can't stop staring at it. But I think it's the positioning of the defect where my eyes and the attraction to the book, I'm fixated on the center and I'm not zoomed in on the corners so much. And then if there's that color breaking tick right smack in the middle, I just can't help but stare at it. And there was, actually it was Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars #8, the first Black Suit Spidey. And I got it in a 9.6 off Heritage Auctions. And I knew what I was bidding on. I saw the scan, but when I got the book back home and I looked at it, there was a fold, crease, and a color breaking tick right in the middle of the book. And as soon as I saw it, I just wanted to sell it. I didn't want it. I displayed it for a little while, and all I could do was stare at that tick. The only copy I've ever had, it's gone. I sold it, and there's just part of me that I just get too fixated on things like that, and I'm way off in a tangent. So let me get back to the spreadsheet. This was a decent set of auction wins, I think, and there's some potential to even further gain some value from this, but not all were wins. Let's take a look. Nebula #1, that book rated out as a 9.4 to me, with no way really to improve it, so I did not indicate that it could be pressed. It is a $10 book according to cover price, but in a CGC 9.4, we're talking about $22, so really not much value there. That would have been a mistake if I just sent that book in as is. Another nice surprise, Phoenix Resurrection, The Return of Jean Grey, the Art Germ variant, the open order variant, that one graded out as a 9.8, as is. I don't think it needs to be pressed. And in a CGC 9.8, that book is a $65 book. So that's really cool. $28 potential value add there if I were to get the book graded. Spider-Man #1, I'll talk about that for a second. It is a newsstand copy. Technically those early 90s books, or even late 80s to some degree, the newsstands, there is some attraction to those. That's why I ended up bidding on it. It only cost me $9.40 to acquire it. Just Comics listed it as an 8.0, and I have it as a 9.0. And again, just because of kind of what I've been seeing recently, I really harshly downgraded it because both of the corners on the left of the book near the spine were extremely rounded and soft, and just figured they're going to kill this book. Realistically, but again, I'm kind of influencing how I feel about grading and not thinking about actual grading. I feel like that book is probably a 9.4. I marked it as a clean and press candidate just because the back of the book, it did seem to have some sort of layer of filth on it. And I don't know if it was the paper quality or what, but almost to the touch, I just didn't like it. And so that's why I graded it pretty harshly down at a 9.0. It wasn't an 8. The spine is completely tick free. The back is just, again, slightly dirty, I would say. Rounded corners. Really not that bad. I don't think it was an 8.0. I feel like it was kind of a rush grade by the seller. I gave it a 9. In a CGC 9.0, it's valued at $47. I paid $9.40. It's kind of borderline. And I'll show you what the auto decisioning, I don't want to say engine, but formula came up with, because I think it's interesting. It's kind of an exercise that I do where I'm hiding the decision. So you can't see the decision on the screen right now, and neither can I. And the question is, would you grade this book? Would you submit it to CGC? You know, I mentioned that there's some filth on the back. Would you send it for cleaning and pressing? All of these things cost money, they cost time, etc. What would you do? And that is part of me is I feel like, oh, well, I collect that book. I'm staring at my direct copy I have on the wall, signed by McFarlane. Like, what don't I want a newsstand to go with it? Is it worth it? Yeah, I'll send it in. But then I have to look at the decision formula and see what it spits out to see if it matches up. And what it does is it takes the emotional side and the logical side and tries to see if they're in alignment. Because in some cases, the logical side may say, send this book in, but I might not really like the book or want to. So that's where you have to have the collector and sort of the realist always kind of line up, in my opinion, to really kind of maximize your enjoyment and your resources as you're putting it into the hobby. X-Men 290, kind of a wash. I gave it a 9.4, $45 in a CGC 9.4. Not much of a raw value add, pretty cheap investment, $4 there. Thor 333 was a bit of a mess. That is a newsstand copy. I did end up giving it a 7.0. I mentioned on the video that they listed it as an 8.0. I couldn't give it an 8, just too much damage to the book. A lot of like even not paper shredding, but just almost tearing, but just too many like color breaking wrinkles on it. And I ended up dropping it as a 7. And I've already decided that I'm going to let the book go. So I've indicated that this book is going to be queued up to create an automatic listing on eBay for sale. So I'm going to move on from this book. It was only a $4 investment to see how it would turn out. It does have fair market value, $15 in a 7.0. I think that's ridiculously high. It is a $2 or $3 book, most likely as a 7.0. But according to cover price being what it is, which is not always accurate, but just to keep things all equal here, over $10 of value added. Again, take it for what it's worth there. And then Wonder Woman 10, I gave a 9.4, and X-Men Red Annual 9.4. So if you're looking back here in column C and just kind of comparing, the grades were pretty accurate. The Phoenix book was a 9.6 plus. That did get a 9.8. Spider-Man, I think it was an upgrade, 8 to 9. X-Men 290, upgrade from 9.2 to 9.4. You could see everything got like basically one bump, except the 8.0 Thor went from a 7, and the Wonder Woman, I don't think that's a 4.0. I gave it a 5. And the question kind of becomes for me, what if I'm wrong in either direction? Meaning, what if it's actually a 4.5 or what if it's a 5.5? These sort of mid-grade, especially in like the silver or bronze, they're really difficult for me. I know there's like a point system where you can actually count defects and everything, but honestly, I don't have time to do that. I kind of just eyeball, and I'm holding this book and I'm going through it and I'm looking at the issues on the bottom and not being super scientific about it. I mean, I kind of understand defects that push a grade down into mid range, paper tearing, long color breaks, long folds, corner issues, dirt on the back, foxing. Like I have a pretty good idea, but I don't scientifically grade these books. So what ended up happening was I didn't quite know what to do in terms of how do I make the decision. So let me reveal the decisions. I want to go back to Wonder Woman here in a second, but I'm going to go to the right and show you the decisions that I came up with and some of the other adjustments that I made. And I'm going to just go ahead and reveal everything here so you can see all of the data. All right, so here are some of the changes that I made. You can obviously see the decisions here if you were guessing, like, what am I going to end up doing with these books? What I did change in my spreadsheet is I wanted to go ahead and permanently reveal the values for the next 3 grades up. Now, what I do is if it's a 9-6, then the grade 1, 2, and 3 are all the same. So you can see X-Men 509 is an example of that. So hopefully that makes sense. That's just what I do in terms of calculating the average because there's only 1 grade bump available. And I typically reveal this only if it's pressable, but I wanted to see all of it just because there was another step that I was missing, which is if I'm not going to sell it, I'm not going to have it pressed, and I don't think it's available for a pre-screen, but it does have value just as is. What should I do? Now, I did indicate that this book would benefit from a clean and press. I think most books do in general from this age, and when you're buying from this seller or sellers like this, I think that's another thing that you start to learn is typically almost all of their older books would benefit from some improvement. But according to my formulas, the value of this book, it's not worth sending it off for cleaning and pressing. There's the additional investment is not worth it because even at a grade bump, you can see that we're really only moving up into the $90 range. And when you're looking at all of the costs involved for pressing, for grading, but also what it costs you to acquire the book, in some cases, even if it could be improved, it's not worth it. Now, of course, if you're pressing books yourself, that's a difference maker. But I'm not going to deal with Wonder Woman 200. It's not worth my time. And I don't think it's really worth a presser's time. This is like absolutely straight down the middle, mid-grade. Could be considered low grade to mid-grade, but if you're just saying low, medium, high, it's medium or mid. It's right down the middle. And so it's not really worth the presser's time either, in my opinion. But as is, it would be worth sending to CGC, and here's why. What I've done is I've calculated here, and I run out of space from time to time, so my columns may not be in some sort of linear order here. I have column AR, which is kind of what my suggested sale price is. So just ignore that for right now. In fact, let me just hide it so that this makes sense. So what I end up doing is if I completely evaluate the book and it doesn't fall into one of these categories, pre-screen, press, create listing, or basically if it comes back as a blank, like there's nothing left to do, I do one last eval. And what I do is I say, okay, if whatever the grade is here, 5.0, what is it if I'm wrong? Meaning if it's actually a 4.5, what is the value? And in a CGC 4.5, the book drops to $67.50. But if I were to be wrong in the right way and it got a grade bump up from a 5 to a 5.5, we're talking about it being a $90 CGC 5.5. Again, this is not breaking the bank or anything. It's just an example. And if we go back and look at my investment, it cost me $22.29. I felt like for about $22, that was a nice pickup. Cover Price has it as an $86 book raw. I mean, maybe there's some additional tweaking to the formula that says, hey, if it's worth more raw than it is as a CGC 5.0, maybe you just sell it as is or keep it as is, right? Just don't even mess with slabbing. And that might be something, as I'm talking through this, I might want to adjust. But in terms of just looking at the calculation, we have a CGC $79. And what I do is I take the $79, the grade bump of $90, and then the grade loss of $67.50. I average the three. I take a look at what it costs to get the book graded. And something else I just realized is I'm not taking into account that this is a pre-1975 book, so I'm going to have to adjust that as well. I do have the year over here as 1972, so I can use that data. So actually, now that I think about it, this may not actually meet the criteria to send it off for grading, but in general, that's kind of the idea. Over here, I've got some of the calculations. I've got like a CGC range, a CGC eval, press eval, and this is where I do all of my different calculations to determine whether or not it's worthy of pre-screening, pressing, or sending to CGC outright. Now, this one had a positive $5.82 potential value add overall if I were to send it in based on these averages, and that's what triggered the send to CGC. But it is more than $5 more to grade a pre-1975 book than it is a modern. So everything from 1975 to date is considered within the modern tier for CGC. So this would probably put this out of the range, and then that actually saved me from slabbing a book that is more valuable raw. That was a lot to go through. I may have to do this a few more times for it to really sink in. There's some things that I'm learning actually as I'm sharing this information with you and talking through it, where I might want to make some even further adjustments. And you can see there's a lot of decisions that have to go on when you're really looking at the values and the data, particularly around the cover price raw being more than the slab value. It's like, why would I go through the trouble and the hassle and having my book sit in Florida for 2 months? It might just make sense to keep it raw. It's a great book raw. It presents well. I had been after this book for some time, and I was really surprised that a seller on HipComic, not named Infinity Comics, had this book, and very happy to have it for roughly $20. I think it's a decent pickup. And then I'm just showing this because this is awesome. Web of Spider-Man #1. I put it in a nice fullback here, gave it the 9.2 with the press indicator, and would love to have this book pressed out and potentially graded in hopefully a 9.8, but maybe even a 9.6. And that's part of the calculation too, is it's just trying to figure out if these books are not getting the full jump. I want to make sure that I'm not overspending on some of these, because you can't really improve the books beyond the condition that they're in. You have to be realistic, but the same holds true for value. You can't look at a 9.8 value and just say, yep, that's what I'm going to get. I'm going to push this book and get it improved, get CGC on a good day, and I'm going to hit that 9.8 and max out the value on it. It doesn't always work, and so a lot of these formulas are here to keep me honest. Let me know what you think about all of these calculations. Does it make sense? Do you have any questions? I'd be happy to answer them if you do. Feel free to leave a comment or contact me directly if you have any feedback. Thanks for watching. Happy collecting, and see you next time.